The dust of the Arizona Territory was a living thing. It was not the soft, dark soil of Missouri. This was a fine, red grit that worked its way into the seams of a man's clothes, into the lines of his hands, and, Ethan Matthews suspected, into the chambers of his heart. It coated the broad leaves of the ocotillo and settled on the thorny arms of the giant saguaros that stood like silent, watching sentinels on the hillsides. For 5 years, this dust had been Ethan's only constant companion. His ranch was a small square of stubborn intention carved into the sprawling, indifferent landscape. A sturdy, 2-room house built of timber he had hauled himself, a solid barn, and a corral fenced with mesquite posts. It was neat, orderly, and quiet. The silence was the loudest thing here. It was a heavy blanket he pulled over himself every night, a silence that echoed with the ghosts of voices he had last heard in Missouri, a wife's laugh, a son's chatter. The silence was the sound of everything he had lost, shoveled under the ground by sickness and bad fortune. He had come west to bury the man he had been. Here, there was only the work. The work was pure. You fixed a fence. It stayed fixed. You dug a well. You got water. The land did not lie to you. It might kill you with heat or thirst. But it was an honest death. He lived by a strict discipline, rising before the sun painted the eastern mesas purple, and working until his muscles ached with a satisfying burn. He was a man who preferred the company of his horses to that of people. He spoke little, letting his actions define him. He was honorable. He paid his debts, and he stayed out of other men's affairs. It was the only way to survive in a place like Red Butte. The town was a day's ride, a necessary evil. He cinched the saddle on his buckskin gelding, the leather groaning in the dry air. He needed flour, salt, and cartridges. The ride itself was a study in desolation. The wind was a dry, hot breath that carried nothing but more dust and the scent of creosote. The hills rolled away, jagged and harsh, until they met a sky so vast and blue it seemed to press down on the world. Red Butte was not so much a town as a scar. It had sprung up on the promise of silver and held on through sheer, stubborn greed. The main street was a wide ribbon of red dirt, churned to powder by wagon wheels and shod horses. On either side stood a collection of false front buildings, their paint peeling under the relentless sun. Saloons and gambling halls outnumbered the mercantile and the blacksmith shop 3-to-1. As Ethan rode in, the familiar tension of the place settled on him. It was a town of hard men and harder bargains. Miners, their faces permanently stained with rock dust, drank alongside lean, watchful cowboys. Settlers, mostly families trying to scratch a living from the unforgiving soil, hurried past, their eyes down, and always, on the edges, were the Apache. They came in to trade, moving with a silent grace that seemed to unnerve the white townsfolk. The air crackled with unspoken suspicion. Every miner griped about stolen tools, every rancher about missing calves. The blame, spoken in whispers or in drunken shouts, always fell on the Apache camps hidden back in the high canyons. Ethan tied his horse in front of the general mercantile, giving the animal a reassuring pat. He saw Sheriff Collier sitting in a tilted chair on the boardwalk outside his office. Collier was a man who had found the perfect balance of doing just enough to keep his badge and not enough to ever break a sweat. He watched the town with a lazy, indifferent gaze, his primary concern the comfort of his own boots, which were currently propped up on the hitching rail. Order in Red Butte was a matter of suggestion, not enforcement. Ethan nodded once to the sheriff. "Sheriff." Collier tipped his hat an inch. "Matthews." Inside, the mercantile smelled of coffee beans, cured leather, and dust. He gathered his supplies, moving with quiet efficiency. He was at the counter, counting out his coins, when he heard the voices from the back of the store, near the barrels of nails and rope. "He wants the whole valley, I tell you," one man said, his voice low. "Marcus Hale is not a man who stops halfway." Ethan kept his eyes on his coins. He knew the name, Everyone did. Marcus Hale was a titan, a man who had come west with nothing and built an empire of cattle and silver. His Double H ranch sprawled over half the county, and his mines employed half the town. He was the unseen hand that moved pieces on the board. "It is his land to want," another man replied, this one sounding nervous. "But he is pushing too hard. The Apache will not be moved just for his cattle." "They will if they are pushed right." The first voice was cold. "That is why Hale keeps Wade Kincaid on the payroll." A different kind of silence fell at the mention of that name. If Hale was the hand, Wade Kincaid was the hammer. Kincaid had been a bounty hunter, known for his ruthless efficiency and a particular, burning hatred for the native tribes. He was a man with dead eyes and a fast gun, and he now served as Hale's foreman. He was the shadow that fell over any dispute Hale had. "Speaking of pushing," the nervous man said, "you hear about the fire out by the old Apache Creek claim?" "Aye, third one this month. That old prospector's shack burned to the ground." "Lightning, they say." The first man gave a short, harsh laugh. "Lightning. Funny how this lightning only ever strikes shacks on land Hale has expressed an interest in. And funny how it always happens after some talk of Apache trouble." "Some are saying it is the Apache themselves," the nervous man whispered. "Retaliation." "Let them say it. It serves Hale's purpose all the same, creates the right kind of pressure." Ethan finished his transaction, his face revealing nothing. He had heard the rumors himself. Small, scattered fires at abandoned digs and line shacks. Most dismissed it. This was a dry land. Lightning fires were common. But the whispers that blamed the Apache were growing louder, feeding the suspicion that already choked the town. Ethan lifted his heavy sack of flour to his shoulder. He did not like Marcus Hale, and he liked Wade Kincaid even less. But it was not his trouble. He had his own fences to mend. He left the store, the low, conspiratorial voices fading behind him. He loaded his supplies onto his pack mule, his movements economical. He avoided the saloons, where the talk would be louder and the tempers shorter. He just wanted the peace of his own land. The ride home was slow. The sky had changed. The brilliant blue was bruising to a deep, ominous purple in the west. The air grew heavy, still, and charged with electricity. It was the smell of a dry storm, the cruelest trick of the desert sky. It promised relief but delivered only wind and fire. He reached his ranch as the first gusts of wind began to stir the red dust. He penned the mule and turned his horse into the corral. He stood for a moment, checking his stock, his gaze scanning the familiar lines of the hills. His discipline made him observant. He noticed things, the way a hawk circled, the track of a coyote, the change in the wind. And that is when he saw it. Far to the north, beyond his property line, in the broken country where old gold miners had once chased dreams, a thin column of smoke was rising. It was pale gray, not the dark, oily black of a pine fire, but the distinct smoke of dry wood and cloth. It was exactly where he knew an old, abandoned prospector's shack stood, tucked into a small ravine. He looked up. The sky was dark, but no lightning had yet split the clouds. The rumors from the mercantile returned to him. Lightning, they say. He stood frozen for a long minute. It was miles away. It was an empty shack. It was, most importantly, not his business. He had learned the hard way that inviting trouble was the surest way to get it. His first instinct, honed by 5 years of solitary survival, was to turn away, to go inside his sturdy house and bar the door against the coming wind. He looked at the smoke. It was small, but it was growing. He thought of the heat, the dryness. He thought of the lies spreading in Red Butte. Then he thought of nothing at all. He was a good man. He did the right thing, especially when no one was watching. His horse was still saddled, with a weary sigh that was half groan, half prayer. Ethan Matthews pulled his hat down firm, grabbed the reins, and swung himself back into the saddle. He nudged the horse into a steady lope, heading not for his barn, but for the smoke. The buckskin gelding scrambled up the loose scree of the ridge, its breathing heavy. Ethan leaned low over its neck, the hot, dry wind whipping at him. He tasted the smoke now, acrid and chemical, not the clean scent of burning mesquite. He crested the rise and pulled the horse to a jarring halt. The shack was below him, a small, pine box structure tucked into a dry ravine. It was not just smoking. It was an inferno. The dry timber, baked by decades of Arizona sun, was burning with an explosive speed. The roof was a sheet of leaping orange flame, and the wind was pushing the fire in a terrible, roaring wave. His first thought was relief. It was an empty shack, just as he had supposed, a wasted ride, but at least no one was in danger. He began to rein the horse back, to turn it away from the furnace heat. Then he heard it. The sound was thin, high, and pierced the crackle of the flames like a needle. It was a scream. It was not the cry of a hawk or a coyote. It was a child. His blood, which had been pumping from the hard ride, turned to ice. The ghosts of Missouri, the small graves he had dug, rose up in his mind. Not again. He would not stand by again. He was off the horse before it fully stopped, his boots hitting the ground in a spray of gravel. He ran toward the blaze, the heat scorching his face, making his eyes water. The front of the shack, where the door had been, was a solid wall of fire. The entire structure was groaning, preparing to collapse. He heard the scream again, choked off by a cough. It came from inside, toward the back. He saw the horse trough, a half-rotten wooden basin near the corral. It was almost empty, holding only a few inches of green, scummy water. He did not hesitate. He ran to it, ripped his heavy flannel shirt from his body, and plunged it into the murky water. It came out soaked and dripping. He wrapped the wet cloth tight around his face, covering his mouth and nose. The water was already starting to steam from the ambient heat. He circled the shack, looking for a way in. The windows were small, and the fire licked out of them. He found the back wall. It was made of old, brittle planks. He planted his feet and slammed his right boot into the wood. The plank splintered but held. He kicked again, harder, the impact jarring his leg to the hip. The wood cracked. A third kick, driven by desperation, burst the wall open. A wave of black, choking smoke rolled out, forcing him to his knees. He dropped to his belly, pressing his face to the ground where the air was a fraction clearer. He crawled into the blackness. It was like entering the mouth of a volcano. He could not see. He could only hear the roar of the fire and the terrible snapping sound of the roof beams above him. "Where are you?" he yelled, his voice a muffled bark through the wet shirt. He saw them. Through the swirling smoke, he saw two small shadows huddled in the far corner. They were hiding under a simple wooden table, their small bodies pressed against the wall. The roof let out a long, terrible groan. A shower of sparks and burning embers rained down. He scrambled on his hands and knees. He reached them. Two little girls, Apache. Their eyes were huge, black pits of terror, reflecting the red glare of the fire. The younger one, she could not have been more than 8, was slumped against the wall, her body limp. The older one, perhaps 10, was trying to pull her, shaking her shoulder. "We have to go," he yelled. "Now!" He did not wait for an answer. He hooked his arm under the younger girl, pulling her small, light body onto his back. She was coughing weakly. He grabbed the wrist of the older girl. Her skin was hot. "Hold on to me. Do not let go of my arm." He turned, half crawling, half dragging them back toward the hole he had kicked. The older girl stumbled, crying out. The world above them exploded. A sound like a cannon shot filled the small space as the main roof beam finally cracked in two. "Go!" he roared. He shoved the older girl forward, pushing her bodily through the broken wall. He lunged after her, clutching the younger child tight, diving headfirst into the open air. They landed in a heap on the hard, rocky ground. He rolled, twisting his body to shield the small child as they tumbled away from the wall. He felt a blinding, searing pain in his right hand. He had landed on a piece of burning timber that had been blasted from the wall. An instant later, the entire roof of the shack collapsed inward with a final, whooshing crash. A column of fire and sparks shot into the dark sky, right where they had been kneeling only seconds before. They were out. They were safe. Ethan lay on the ground, gasping, pulling the smoldering shirt away from his face. His lungs burned. He was breathing dust and smoke. He looked at the child in his arms. She was breathing. He looked at the older girl. She was on her knees, staring at the fire. He pushed himself up to a sitting position. "Are you all right? Are you hurt?" The older girl scrambled to her feet. She snatched her younger sister from Ethan's arms. The moment the younger one was secure, the older girl's terror found a new focus. She looked at Ethan. She saw a large white man, his face black with soot, his eyes red from the smoke. She let out a piercing shriek, not of pain but of pure fear. She pulled her sister, who was now conscious and crying, and they bolted. They ran, stumbling and falling into the darkness of the surrounding rocks and mesquite trees. "Wait," Ethan called, his voice raw. "It is safe. The fire is done." They did not slow down. They vanished into the scrubland like frightened quail. But just before she disappeared into the shadows, the older girl stopped. She turned back, her face a pale mask in the gloom. She raised her hand, her small finger pointing. She was not pointing at him. She was not pointing at the burned shack. She was pointing back up the trail, the way someone would have come. She made a quick, slashing motion with her hand, a gesture he did not understand. Then, like a ghost, she was gone. Ethan was left alone in the sudden silence, kneeling in the dirt. The only sound was the crackle of the dying fire and the nervous stamp of his horse, which watched him from a safe distance. He looked down at his right hand. The pain, which had been a dull throb, now screamed. His palm was laid open, a deep, angry burn across the tough flesh. It would be useless for days. He staggered to his feet, his body aching, his lungs raw. He leaned against a boulder and watched the last of the shack's walls fall in. He was confused, and a deep weariness settled over him. He had just saved their lives. He had pulled them from the fire. Why would they run from him as if he were the one who had tried to kill them? Then the cold, hard truth of the Arizona Territory came back to him. He was a white man. They were Apache children. In their world, a man like him appearing through a wall of smoke was not a rescuer. He was just another part of the danger. He understood the suspicion in Red Butte, the hatred. He had just never seen it in the eyes of a child he was trying to save. The fire was mostly embers now. The dry wind had stalled, the promised storm holding its breath. He had to make sure the fire was out. He could not risk it spreading. He walked carefully toward the smoking rubble, cradling his burned hand. He picked up a long, unburned piece of wood with his good left hand and began to poke at the perimeter, pushing dirt and rocks onto the glowing embers to smother them. As he worked, he smelled it again. It was stronger now that the main fire was down. It was not wood smoke. It was the sharp, resinous smell of pine oil, or perhaps turpentine. It was an accelerant, something to make the fire catch fast. He stopped. His eyes narrowed. This was not the smell of a lightning strike. He began to search, his movements slow and deliberate. He walked to the edge of the rubble, near where the door had been. The ground was scorched black. He kicked at the dirt near a large rock that had sheltered the ground, and he saw it. Lying in the dust, just at the edge of the burn line, was a small, thin piece of wood. It was charred on one end. He bent down and picked it up carefully with his left hand. It was a matchstick, not one of the big, sulfur-tipped lucifers he kept in his kitchen. This was a small, manufactured match. He turned it over. Even in the fading light, he could make out the faded red and yellow printing on the wood. It was the image of a coyote howling at a moon. He knew it instantly. Coyote brand matches. They sold them in every saloon in Red Butte. They were cheap, They were the kind of matches Wade Kincaid, Marcus Hale's man, was always striking on his boot heel. Ethan stood frozen, staring at the match. The rumors from the mercantile, lightning, they say. There had been no lightning tonight, but there was pine oil, and there was a coyote match. This was not an accident. This was arson. And those two little girls, they were not just caught in a fire. They were meant to be in it. Someone had set this fire. Someone had known they were inside, or perhaps trapped them inside. Someone was trying to start a war, using the lives of two children as the kindling. His simple act of riding toward the smoke had changed everything. He had stepped out of his quiet, orderly life and into the middle of a burning, murderous plot. He looked at his burned hand. The pain was a grounding, terrible reality. This was no longer someone else's trouble. They had burned it into his skin. He turned slowly and walked back to his waiting horse, the small matchstick clutched tightly in his good hand. The sun rose hot and immediate. There was no gentle dawn in Arizona, just a sudden, brutal eviction of the night. Ethan was awake, as he always was, long before the light. The pain in his hand had kept him in a state of shallow, restless sleep. He had cleaned the burn as best he could with whiskey and water, the alcohol turning the raw flesh white, the pain making him see stars. He had wrapped it in a strip of clean flour sack. It was clumsy, a thick, useless paddle at the end of his arm. He stood on his porch, coffee in his good left hand, and stared north toward the ravine. The smoke was gone, leaving only a faint, bitter haze in the air. The coyote match was on the shelf above his fireplace, a small, damning piece of evidence. He had spent the night wrestling with its meaning. He had come west to find peace, to build a life so quiet it could not be touched by the outside world. He had failed. The world had found him. The fire had branded him. He was attempting to scatter feed for his chickens, tossing the grain awkwardly with his left hand. When he saw them, they were not on horseback. They were walking. 3 figures emerging from the heat shimmers of the eastern scrubland. A woman and 2 children, even from a distance. He recognized the small, determined shapes of the 2 girls from the fire. He stopped, the grain spilling from his hand. His heart began a low, heavy drumbeat against his ribs. He felt a sudden, sharp instinct to turn, to go inside, to bar the door. They were coming to him. He was the white man who had pulled them from the smoke. He was the man they had run from. He stood his ground by the chicken coop, waiting. They approached slowly, without haste, but with a clear, unwavering purpose. The woman walked in front. She was tall for an Apache, slender but strong, moving with a fluid grace that seemed to ignore the rocks and thorns in her path. She wore a simple buckskin dress, decorated with fine, intricate beadwork at the collar and sleeves. Her black hair was parted in the middle and tied back, revealing a face of high cheekbones, a strong jaw, and dark, intelligent eyes that missed nothing. She looked to be in her early 30s. She looked like a woman who had known sorrow but had refused to be broken by it. The 2 girls walked behind her. The older one, Chenoa, met his gaze with a defiant, fearful stare. She recognized him. The younger, Tianita, held fast to her mother's dress, her face hidden in its folds. They stopped a few yards from him. The woman's eyes swept over his small ranch, noting the sturdy barn, the mended corral, the clean porch. Her gaze finally settled on him. She saw the soot still smudged on his jaw, and she saw the thick white bandage on his right hand. She spoke. Her voice was low and clear, her English careful and measured, each word chosen with precision. "My name is Camilla. These are my daughters, Chenoa and Tianita." Ethan nodded. He felt awkward, a large, clumsy man in the face of her profound, quiet dignity. He gestured toward the porch. "Water. You have walked a long way." She did not move. "We are not here for water. We are here for you." Camilla stepped forward, her daughters moving with her like shadows. She looked at his bandaged hand. "You were burned." He reflexively tried to hide it. "It is nothing." "It is not nothing," she corrected him, her voice soft but firm. "It is the brand of the fire. My daughters. They live because of that hand." Chenoa, the older girl, whispered something to her mother in their own language, her eyes fixed on Ethan. Camilla nodded. "My daughter says you appeared from the smoke like a spirit. She says you kicked the wall down." Ethan looked at the ground. "The wall was old. I heard them." "You saved them," Camilla stated. It was not a question. It was a fact, a stone dropped into the quiet morning air. She took a deep breath, and when she spoke again, her voice held the weight of a sacred oath. "In the way of my people, a life saved is a life owed. You have saved 2 lives. My life, as their mother, is bound to theirs. Therefore, my family owes you a debt that cannot be paid." Ethan felt a knot tighten in his stomach. He knew, vaguely, of these customs. He had heard tales in town, usually spoken with mockery, about such things. "Camilla, I did what anyone would have done." She met his gaze, and he saw the iron in her eyes. "No, not anyone. Not in this land. Not for us," she continued, her voice formal. "A debt of this size cannot be paid with horses or with silver. It can only be paid with life for life. We have come to pay." Ethan did not understand. "Pay how?" Camilla gestured to herself, then to her children. "We will stay. We will live here. My daughters will sweep your floor and tend your garden. I will cook your food, mend your clothes, and keep your house. We will be your family. We will work for you until the debt is paid, which is never." The silence that followed was heavy and absolute. Ethan stared at her. He saw the pride in her posture, a pride that was warring with the humility of her offer. He saw the desperation behind it, but all he heard was a word he had grown up hating in Missouri. He heard a polite, ceremonial word for slavery. He had lost his family. He knew what a family was. It was not something you earned by pulling someone from a fire. It was not a debt. He shook his head, slowly at first, then with more force. "No." Camilla's face stiffened. It was a word she had not expected. "No," Ethan said again, his voice rough. "I will not accept that. I will not have servants. I will not have people owned. That is not what I did. I pulled 2 children from a burning building. That is the end of it. You do not owe me anything. You are free to go." He turned, intending to go back to his chores, to end this deeply uncomfortable exchange. "We cannot go," Camilla said, the words sharp with a new emotion, fear. Ethan stopped. He looked back at her. "If we go back, we will be killed." The heat of the morning seemed to vanish, replaced by a sudden, cold dread. "What do you mean?" Camilla stepped closer. Her eyes darted to her children, who were now watching a lizard on a rock. Momentarily distracted, she lowered her voice to a whisper. "That fire," she said, her voice barely audible. "It was not a dry storm. There was no lightning in that ravine last night." Ethan's blood ran cold. He stayed perfectly still, his face a mask. He did not look at the matchstick on his shelf. He only looked at her. "You are certain?" "I am certain," she said, a bitter anger in her voice. "I was watching the sky. The clouds were dark, but the air was dead. The storm never broke. That fire was set by men." Ethan felt the pieces of the puzzle clicking into place, the whispers in the mercantile, the coyote match, the smell of pine oil. Camilla continued, her whisper urgent. "I sent my brother, Chiton, at first light. He is a warrior. He can read the ground as you read a book. He went to the shack." "What did he find?" "He found the smell, the oil you use for lamps, but stronger. Poured on the wood. He found tracks." Ethan's hand throbbed. Tracks, like the ones the older girl, Chenoa, had tried to warn him about. The pointing finger, the slashing motion he did not understand. Camilla confirmed it. 3 horses. They wore iron shoes, like the horses of the white men, not the unshod ponies of the people. Chiton followed them. "Where did they go?" Ethan asked, though he already knew the answer. She looked him square in the eye. They led north. They led toward the grazing lands of the Double H, toward the ranch of Marcus Hale. The name landed between them, heavy as an anvil. Ethan finally understood. This was not a random act of hate. This was a plan, a cold, calculated move in a war for land. Those girls were not just victims. They were meant to be the spark. Their deaths would have been blamed on a rival tribe, or used as proof that the Apache were setting fires, giving Hale the excuse he needed to run them off the land he coveted. His rescue had ruined that plan, but it had also created a terrible new problem. The men who set the fire, Camilla said, her voice trembling for the first time. They believe no one saw them, but they will learn that my children were in that shack. They will learn that my children survived, that they were pulled out. They will know there is a witness. They will come to silence them, to silence us. Ethan looked at Chenoa and Tyanita. He was no longer just a man who had stumbled upon a fire. He was a witness, and he was now the protector of the only other living witnesses. He had not just stepped into a land dispute. He had stepped into a murder plot. His solitude was shattered. His small, quiet ranch was now the most dangerous place in the Arizona territory. Camilla saw the understanding in his face. She saw the conflict. She straightened her back. "We did not come to you as beggars," she said, her pride returning. "We came to offer the only thing we have left, our lives, our hands. We will earn our protection. We will be your partners." Ethan looked at his house. The 2 rooms seemed impossibly small. He thought of the town. He thought of Sheriff Collier, asleep on his porch. There was no help there. He thought of Marcus Hale and his hired gun, Wade Kincaid. He was one man with one good hand against an empire. He let out a long, slow breath. This had to be done right. His mind, trained in discipline and order, began to work. If they stayed, they could not be servants. That was a weakness. That was a vulnerability Hale could exploit. "If you stay," he said, his voice quiet but absolute, "it will not be as servants. It will be as equals." Camilla watched him, confused. "I will not be your master," he said, "but I will be your partner. We will share this roof. We will share this food. And we will share this fight. But it must be done with the law." He looked at the small, dark storage room that butted against his main bedroom. It was filled with old saddles and burlap sacks. "I need time," he said, more to himself than to her. "I cannot have you living like animals. I need 1 week." Camilla frowned. "A week? I need to make this house ready for you. I need to cut a window in that storage room. I need to build beds, a proper bed for you, and a bunk bed for the girls. They must have their own space." He looked at Camilla. "And I need to go to town. I need to see a lawyer." "A lawyer?" The word sounded foreign on her tongue. "To make it legal," Ethan insisted, the idea forming as he spoke, "to draw up papers, a partnership, a legal guardianship for the children. Perhaps something that says you have a right to be here. Something that even Sheriff Collier cannot ignore. If Hale comes, he comes against the law. Not just against me." He looked at his bandaged hand. "And I need to figure out how to build a bunk bed with one hand." Camilla studied his face for a long time. She saw the exhaustion from the fire. She saw the deep, old sadness he carried. And she saw a flicker of something she had not seen in a white man before, a stubborn, unyielding core of honor. Her expression changed. The heavy burden of the life debt was gone. The raw fear was still there, but it was now tempered by something new. It was not just gratitude. It was a fragile, dangerous hope. "The spirits of the mountain did not lie," she whispered. "They guided you to the fire. They have guided us to this house." She nodded once, a sharp, decisive gesture. "1 week. We will return in 7 days. Be ready." She turned and called to her daughters. They came to her side, their eyes still fixed on Ethan. Camilla placed her hands on their shoulders, and the 3 of them turned and began the long walk back into the hills, back to the temporary safety of her brother's camp. Ethan stood on the porch and watched them go until they were just 3 small dots disappearing into the blazing heat. He looked at his quiet house. It was no longer a refuge. It was a target. He went inside and looked at the storage room. It was dark, cramped, and smelled of dust and old leather. He had 1 week to turn it into a home. He had 1 week to become a carpenter, a lawyer, and a guardian. He picked up his good hammer with his left hand. The silence of the ranch was gone, replaced by the sound of his own determined work. The 7 days that followed were a blur of focused, agonizing labor. Ethan learned the true meaning of his right hand's absence. Sawing a clean line with his left arm was a clumsy, frustrating ordeal. The wood fought him. The saw bucked and jammed. He was trying to cut a new window opening in the thick plank wall of the storage room. Sweat poured off him, stinging the raw, healing flesh of his bandaged hand, which he kept held stiffly at his side. He cursed, not at the pain, but at the inefficiency. He was a man who valued clean work, and this was butchery. But he finished it. He framed the opening and set a pane of glass he had saved from an old cold frame. It was crooked, but it let in the light. He turned his attention to the beds. He had pine boards stored in the barn, seasoned and straight. For Kimela, he built a simple, sturdy frame, taking his time to make the joints fit snug. For the girls, he tackled the bunk bed. This was harder. He had to drill holes, fit pegs, and wrestle the heavy upper frame into place. He propped it up with sacks of grain, his left arm shaking with fatigue, his entire body aching from the awkward angles. He nearly dropped the top bunk twice. His bad hand throbbed with a dull, persistent fire. But when he was done, it stood solid, a small, 2-tiered fortress against the world. He made a second trip to Red Butte, his purpose entirely different. He did not go to the mercantile first. He went to the small office next to the land registry, a building with a modest sign that read Abigail Morse, attorney at law. It was unusual, a woman practicing law on the frontier. Abigail Morse was not a large woman, but she filled her office with a sharp, crackling energy. She had spectacles perched on her nose and a gaze that seemed to penetrate clean through a man's excuses. She was known for being smarter than any 2 men in town and for a tongue that could slice leather. Ethan sat opposite her desk, his hat in his lap, his bandaged hand resting on his knee. He laid out the entire story, starting with the smoke and ending with Kimela's promise to return. He did not embellish. He did not editorialize. He just stated the facts, including the coyote match and the tracks leading to the Double H. Abigail listened, her fingers steepled, her eyes never leaving his. When he finished, she was silent for a full minute. "Mr. Matthews," she said finally, her voice crisp. "You do understand that you have not just pulled 2 children from a fire. You have pulled the pin from a grenade." "I am aware of that, ma'am. Marcus Hale owns this county. He owns the bank, he owns the mines, and he owns Sheriff Collier. The law here is what he says it is, on any given Tuesday." "That is why I am here," Ethan said, his voice flat. "I want paper. I want the law on my side, even if the sheriff is not." Abigail allowed herself a small, thin smile. "Well, that is the most sensible thing I have heard all week. What you are proposing is irregular, but not impossible." She leaned forward. "A partnership agreement. That is good. It gives her a legal standing on your property. We will make it a deed of trust. You are granting her and her issue lifetime rights to reside on and co-manage the property. In return, she provides domestic and agricultural labor. It is a contract. It is binding." "And the children," Ethan said. "Guardianship," Abigail mused. "We can file a petition for you to act as their legal guardian, citing their father's death and the clear and present danger to their lives. It will be conditional, of course, upon their mother's consent. With her as your partner, it will be a strong case. If Hale or Kincaid try to remove them, they will not just be moving Indians. They will be kidnapping legal wards of the court. Good. And one more thing. Mr. Matthews, she pulled a fresh sheet of paper toward her. Your will, given your new dependents and your new enemies, your old one is insufficient. Ethan had not thought of that. He had nothing. Really, just the ranch. I want it left to them. To Camilla, and through her, the girls. All of it. Abigail Morse wrote for several minutes, the scratching of her pen the only sound in the dusty office. You are a strange man. Ethan Matthews? Most men in this town would have run them off with a shotgun. I am not most men, ma'am, he said, standing up. I just want to be left alone, and it seems I have to make a legal fortress to do it. This is a good start, she said, signing the documents with a flourish. But paper will not stop a bullet. Mr. Matthews, be careful. His visit did not go unnoticed. He went to the mercantile to buy bedding, 2 thin mattresses, bolts of calico cloth for curtains, and 2 primers, books for learning to read. The store was fuller this time, and the moment he walked in, the conversations died. He was the center of attention. He felt the stares on his back. He heard the whispers. That is him, the one who heard he is building onto his house. For them, Sheriff Collier was outside, in his usual chair. This time, he did not just tip his hat. He got up and walked over, blocking Ethan's path as he loaded his supplies. Matthews, Collier said, his voice a low, unhappy drawl. Sheriff, I am hearing stories. Ethan, stories I do not like. Stories about you bringing Apache onto your land, permanently. I am a free man. Sheriff, I can hire help if I need it. This is not hiring help, and you know it. This is stirring the pot, Collier said, his eyes shifting nervously toward the Double H wagon down the street. People are on edge. These fires, the talk. You bringing a whole Apache family into your home, it is pouring oil on a flame. Son, is that your official advice, Sheriff, or is that Marcus Hale's? Collier's face flushed red. You watch your tongue. I am the law here. I am telling you for your own good. Do not do this. It is trouble. Send them back. And if I do not? Then you are on your own. Collier snapped. Do not come running to me when your barn burns down. Or worse. You are inviting the fox into your hen house. I will keep that in mind, Ethan said. He tied the last rope and pulled himself onto his horse. Good day, Sheriff. He rode out of town, the weight of a dozen hostile stares on his back. He was no longer just a quiet rancher. He was an outcast. That night, he could not sleep. The house felt different, expectant. He sat on the porch, his rifle across his lap, watching the moon shadows. The wind was still, too still. Around 2 a.m, his horse in the corral let out a low, nervous whicker. Ethan was on his feet in an instant, melting into the deeper shadow of the barn wall. He waited. He watched the fence line, 100 yards out. He saw nothing, but he could feel it, a presence. The hair on his arm stood on end. He stayed there for an hour, unmoving, until the feeling passed, until the horse settled. At sunrise, he walked the perimeter. He found them on the north side, near the rise, horseshoe prints. Not his horse, not his mule. The prints were deep, from a heavy man on a large horse. The horse had stood there for a long time, just watching the house. Then it had turned, and the tracks headed back, north, toward the Double H. He erased the tracks with a branch. He was being watched. On the morning of the 7th day, they came. He saw them at a distance, just as before. This time, they were not alone. A man rode a paint pony alongside them. He was muscular and lean, with long black hair. He carried a rifle in the crook of his arm as if it were a part of him. He sat tall, his face a mask of stone, his eyes scanning everything. This had to be Chaitin, the brother. Ethan stood on his porch. He did not go to them. He waited. Chaitin rode ahead. pulling his pony up a few feet from the steps. He looked at Ethan. His gaze was not hostile. It was something deeper. It was a cold, complete assessment, like a man judging a piece of steel, looking for the flaw that would make it snap. He looked at Ethan's bandaged hand, at the new window, at the solid porch roof. He looked at Ethan's eyes. Camilla and the girls stopped behind him. The girls looked at the house, their eyes wide. Chaitan spoke, his voice a low rumble. "My sister says you are a man of honor." "I am just a man," Ethan said. "You have done this," Chaitan said, gesturing to the new window. "You have built beds." "I said I would." Chaitan continued to stare. "It is a bad thing you have done, white man. Not for you, for us. You have saved them only to put them in a bigger fire. You have painted a target on them, on my sister." "I am aware of that," Ethan said, "but the fire was already lit. They cannot run from it. Their only chance is to have a legal place to stand, a wall to stand behind. This is all I can offer." "A wall of paper," Chaitan said with contempt. "I have seen what your paper means." "This paper is all I have, that and my rifle, and I will use both." The two men locked eyes. It was a test. Chaitan was measuring his spirit. Ethan did not look away. He held the warrior's gaze, not with aggression, but with a simple, stubborn resolve. "Finally," Chaitan grunted. He turned to Camilla and spoke in their language, his voice low and fast. She replied, her voice firm. He argued. She replied again, and this time, she put her hand on her daughter Chenoa's head. Chaitan looked back at Ethan. His face was a mask of grief and frustration. "She has chosen," he said. "She trusts you. I do not. I trust only what I see. I will be close. If you fail her, if you dishonor her, if your paper wall breaks, I will kill you myself." Ethan nodded. "That is fair." Chaitan turned his pony in a tight circle and rode away. Not looking back, he disappeared over the ridge, a silent, watchful guardian. Camilla stepped forward, her daughters pressed close. She looked at Ethan, her face exhausted but resolute. "We are here," she said. "Welcome," Ethan said, his voice thick. He stepped aside and held the door open. Camilla entered first. She stopped in the middle of the main room, taking it all in. The clean floor, the fireplace, the table. Then she looked into the side room. She saw the new window, the light pouring in. She saw the new, sturdy bed. She saw the bunk bed, with the two small mattresses and the neatly folded calico fabric on top. She turned to Ethan, her eyes shining with an emotion so profound he had to look away. The girls crept in after her. Chenoa, the older one, saw the bunk bed and her eyes went wide. She had never seen such a thing. She slowly reached out and touched the wood. Tianita, the little one, hid behind her mother. The house, which had been his shell for 5 years, was suddenly full. For the first few days, they moved around each other like cautious animals. The silence was thick, broken only by necessary words. "The water is there. The firewood is here." Then Camilla began to change the space. She did not ask, she simply acted. She took the calico and, with a needle and thread Ethan gave her, she hemmed the edges and hung the curtains. The harsh afternoon light was softened, tamed. She went out into the hills and returned with bundles of dried sage and sweetgrass. She hung them from the rafters, and the stale, bachelor smell of the house was replaced by a clean, earthy scent. She unrolled a small parcel she had carried, revealing her own tools, bone awls, and beads. In the evenings, she would sit by the fire, her hands moving in a quiet, rhythmic dance, repairing a moccasin or beating a small pouch. The house, once just a shelter, began to feel like a home. The girls were the slowest to thaw. They stayed in their room, whispering, watching Ethan from the doorway. He went about his work, mending his fences, tending his stock, his hand slowly, painfully healing. One afternoon, he was in the barn, trying to milk his cow one-handed, a clumsy and frustrating process. The cow, sensing his irritation, was restless. He heard a small sound. Chenoa was standing in the barn doorway. She watched him. "She does not like it when you are angry," the girl said, her voice small. Ethan stopped, his arm aching. "I am not angry, I am just clumsy." Chenoa stepped inside. "My mother says you have to sing to the cow." Ethan looked at the cow, then at the girl. "Sing." "A soft song, so she knows you are a friend." She walked past him, bolder now, and put her hand on the cow's flank, stroking it and whispering something in her own language. The cow's tail flicked, but she stilled, chewing her cud. The next day, Ethan found a new calf, wobbly and weak, huddled by its mother. It was too weak to nurse. He brought it into the barn, wrapped it in a blanket, and mixed milk and molasses in a bucket. Tianita, the little one, peeked around the stall. "This one needs help," Ethan said gently. "It needs to learn to drink." He dipped his fingers in the milk and held it out. Tianita watched. She crept closer. She looked at the calf's big, wet eyes. Slowly, she reached out one small finger and touched its soft nose. The calf nudged her hand. A tiny, brilliant smile broke across her face. She giggled, a small, rusty sound, like a piece of machinery that had not been used in a long time. Chenoa came running at the sound. Soon, both girls were sitting in the hay, their fingers in the milk, letting the calf suckle, their laughter filling the barn. Ethan stood back and watched. He felt a strange, painful crack in his chest, in the place where Missouri was buried. It was the feeling of something hard and dead breaking apart. That evening, he and Kimela sat at the table. The girls were asleep in their new beds. "Chenoa, Tianita," he said, trying the names. "They are good names." "Chenoa is White Dove," Kimela said, her eyes on her mending. "Tianita is Young Deer." He nodded. "I'm Ethan." "Ethan," she repeated, tasting the sound. "It means strong." "Does it?" He had not known that. "We need rules," he said, getting to the point. "This is your home now, as much as mine. The kitchen, the food is yours to manage. The garden, I will handle the stock and the fences. The well we share. Water is life." She nodded. "And security." His good mood vanished. Security. "I have seen the tracks," she said. "You saw them." "I see everything," she said simply. "As you do." The man who watches. "We need a plan," Ethan said, his voice low. "If they come, the girls, there is a root cellar under the barn. It is deep, it is hidden. If there is trouble, you take them there. Do not wait for me. You just go." She met his gaze. "And you?" "I will be at the front." She accepted this with a simple nod. She held up the primer he had bought. "This you will teach me." "Teach you?" "And the girls, we will learn this paper, this reading. This will be our wall, too." He looked at her fierce, proud face, illuminated by the kerosene lamp. He had invited a warrior into his home. Far away, on the crest of the northern ridge, a man lowered a pair of binoculars. The glass had caught the last ray of the setting sun, a tiny, metallic glint. Wade Kincaid spat a stream of tobacco onto the rocks. He had watched the ranch for 3 days. He had seen the woman and the 2 girls. He had seen the new curtains in the window. He had seen the man, the woman, and the children moving in this new, strange family. "Well, well, cowboy," Kincaid muttered to the wind. "You have gone and bought yourself a whole new family." He smiled, a cold, thin expression that did not reach his dead eyes. He slid the binoculars back into their case. He had seen all he needed to see. He knew how many there were. He knew where they slept. He knew how to break them. The office of Sheriff Collier in Red Butte smelled of stale tobacco, old sweat, and the particular dust that settled on things that were never moved. Marcus Hale did not seem to mind the smell. He sat in the visitor's chair, his expensive, polished boots resting comfortably on the floor. He was a large man, but he carried his size with the quiet authority of wealth. He had not come to shout. He had come to express concern. Hale placed his clean, wide-brimmed hat on the sheriff's cluttered desk. He said he was worried. Sheriff, genuinely worried. He was worried about the good people of this territory, this business with the rustling. For example, he had done a count. He was missing, by his best reckoning, at least 20 head of prime cattle in just the past 2 months. 20 head. Sheriff Collier, who looked like he was wilting in the heat, mumbled something about the dry weather, how cattle could stray, looking for water. Hale smiled, a patient, understanding expression that did not reach his eyes. Stray, he said. Yes, that was one possibility. Or, he said, they could be stolen. Stolen, he repeated, letting the word hang in the hot, still air. And these fires, it was a terrible, terrible thing, such a danger to everyone. He had heard the talk. Of course, he himself did not listen to rumors. But the talk was that the Apache were angry about the miners, angry about the new settlers, that they were setting these fires as warnings, or perhaps as revenge. Hale leaned forward, his voice dropping to a confidential, reasonable tone. He said he had a proposal, a simple one, really a matter of public safety, that northern grazing land, the one that bordered the edge of the reservation. If the territorial government could be persuaded to adjust the boundary line, perhaps move the camps back 5, maybe 10 miles, it would create a natural fire break, a clear space. It would also, coincidentally, give his herds a much wider, safer trail to the northern pass. It was a matter of progress, sheriff, and of safety. Surely he could see the sense in that. Collier, whose gaze had been fixed on the silver band of Hale's hat, nodded slowly. He said he would look into the territorial statutes. He would see what the governor's office thought. Hale smiled, satisfied. He stood, retrieved his hat, and said he knew he could count on the sheriff to do what was right for the good of the community. A week later, a notice was posted on the board outside the town hall. It was a formal petition to the territorial governor, citing increased Apache raids, cattle rustling, and the extreme risk of fire. It requested an immediate and permanent renegotiation of the treaty boundaries for the safety of all settlers. It was signed by Marcus Hale and followed by the names of 20 other men, all of whom Ethan knew, worked for the Double H Ranch or one of Hale's mines. The town was buzzing. At a small, informal town meeting held in the saloon, the air was thick with fear and anger. But Abigail Morse was there. She stood up, her small, spare frame seeming to draw strength from the hostility in the room. Her voice was clear and cut through the smoke. She asked what proof there was, what specific evidence. She demanded, linked any Apache warrior to a single missing cow. She asked if anyone in the room had actually seen an Apache near any of the burned shacks. The room, which had been loud with angry talk, fell silent. Furthermore, she continued, she had in her possession a sworn statement from a credible witness, a witness who was at the scene of the last fire, a witness who smelled not wood smoke, but pine oil. She held up a single sheet of paper. This was not lightning. Gentlemen, she declared, this was arson. She suggested that Sheriff Collier, instead of petitioning the governor, should perhaps investigate who in Red Butte had recently purchased large quantities of turpentine or oil. A man in the back, a Double H foreman, yelled out. He asked why she was always defending them. Abigail Morse adjusted her spectacles. Her gaze was icy. She said she was not defending any one person. She was defending the law, and the law, she reminded them, required evidence. Marcus Hale, who had been watching from a table in the back, drained his glass and left the saloon without a word. The first direct assault on Ethan's ranch came 3 nights after that. It was not a bullet, it was not fire. It came with the sharp, snapping sound of cut wire, and then a low, deep rumbling that shook the very ground. Ethan was out of his bed before his mind was fully awake. He grabbed his rifle. Kimela was already at the window, her silhouette dark against the pale moonlight. "What is it?" he whispered, coming up beside her. "Cattle," she said, her voice tight. He looked. In the ghostly light, he saw a sea of dark shapes and horns. A massive herd, hundreds of them, was pouring through a wide, gaping hole in his northern fence line. They were moving fast, their eyes wild, their hooves churning his best pasture, the one he had been carefully saving for the dry months. They were being driven. He saw a single rider on the ridge, a dark shape against the stars, just watching the chaos he had unleashed. The rider sat his horse for a long, deliberate minute, then turned and vanished back toward the Double H. It was Wade Kincaid. Ethan did not need to see his face to know. By morning, the devastation was complete. His pasture was gone, eaten down to the red dirt or trampled into a muddy ruin. The fence was not just broken, it had been systematically cut in 7 different places. The cattle, their panic over, were now scattered across his property, grazing placidly. Kimela watched him as the sun rose, illuminating the damage. His face was granite. He did not curse. He did not saddle his horse and ride north for a confrontation. His jaw was set so tight the muscles bulged. He walked out of the house, his good left hand clenched, his healing right hand held protectively against his chest. He did not even look at the cattle at first. He walked the entire length of the broken fence line. He knelt in the dirt, examining the tracks of the lone rider. He saw the distinctive, small nick in the print of the left front shoe, Kincaid's horse. He gathered the evidence in his mind, piece by piece, locking it away. He spent the entire day, a long, hot, grueling day, herding the Double H cattle. He pushed them back through the gaps, off his land, his single good arm aching with the effort. He returned to the house after dark, covered in sweat and red dust, his entire body shaking with a cold, controlled fury. He ate the food Kimela put in front of him without speaking. That night, his actions spoke for him. He took Kimela and the girls to the barn. He pulled back a stack of old hides, revealing the thick, low wooden door of the root cellar. He opened it, lit a lantern, and showed them the small, dark space inside. It was deep, and the air was cool. He said, "If they come, if you hear shooting or bells, you do not wait for me. You do not look. You run here. You lock this door from the inside." He had installed a heavy wooden bar on the inner side of the door. Then he showed them the wire. It was thin, almost invisible, strung from the house to the barn, and from the barn to the main corral. On the wire, tied with bits of rawhide, he had hung 4 small brass bells. He touched one. It let out a tiny, clear ring in the quiet of the barn. "If this rings," he said, his voice low and serious, "you run." Kimela met his gaze in the lantern light. She nodded once. She understood completely. This was not a vague warning. This was a plan. The attacks were not just physical. When Ethan next rode to Red Butte to buy fence wire, the town was different. The change was palpable. Men who used to nod a greeting now found something fascinating in the dust at their feet. In the mercantile, the whispers were loud enough for him to hear. He was the man who kept Apaches. He was the man who had turned his back on his own kind. He paid for his wire in stony silence and left. That night, Chiton appeared. He did not ride up to the house. He was just there, a shadow detaching itself from the deeper shadows by the corral. Kimela went out to speak with him. Ethan stayed inside, watching through the window. Their talk was low, urgent, and in their own language. When she came back, her face was grim. She said it was spreading. 2 more camps, small family camps, had been burned. Far to the north, it was the same story. The fires were set at night. The blame was being placed on white prospectors to stir anger. Hale was not just attacking one ranch. He was creating a wildfire of chaos across the territory, building his case for the governor, painting a picture of a land so out of control that the only solution was to move the Apache. The shared danger, the sense of being in a fortress under siege, dissolved the last of the polite distance between Ethan and Kimala. They were partners, bound not just by paper, but by a common threat. They worked on the well together, pulling the long, heavy sucker rod to replace a worn leather gasket. Their hands worked in unison, his strong left, her quick, deft ones, both slick with grease and water. He found himself watching her, the economy of her movements, the way she never wasted a single step. He found himself listening for her, the soft pat of her moccasins on the wooden floor, the low, gentle song she hummed to the girls as she taught them to bead by the fire. One evening, he was trying to read to the girls from the primer. His voice was a rusty, monotonous drone. Chenoa was giggling at his flat pronunciation of the words. Kimela, mending one of his shirts by the light of the fire, looked up. A real, unguarded smile touched her mouth and lit her eyes. It was a flash of warmth so bright it startled him. He lost his place. He found himself smiling back, a strange, unfamiliar feeling in his chest. The next afternoon, the sky, which had been a merciless sheet of hot steel for weeks, turned the color of a fresh bruise. The air grew heavy, still, suffocating. Then the first drop of rain hit the dust, as loud as a gunshot. A moment later, the sky tore open. It was not a gentle rain. It was a deluge, a solid, roaring wall of water that hit the hard-packed earth and turned the yard into a flowing red river in seconds. Ethan and Kimala had been checking the new fence line, testing the tension of the wire. They were 100 yards from the house when the storm broke. They ran. They laughed, slipping and sliding in the sudden glorious mud, the cold water plastering their hair to their faces. They reached the porch at the same instant, dashing for cover, soaked to the skin, gasping for breath. They both turned, leaning against the rail, to watch the spectacular, violent beauty of the desert storm. The air was electric, and the smell of the rain on the dry creosote was a powerful perfume. He said, "We needed this." She said, "The earth was thirsty." He laughed, a real, barking laugh that surprised even him. He turned to go inside, just as she did. They collided in the doorway, a clumsy tangle of wet limbs. He grabbed her arm to steady her. She grabbed his. They stood there, water dripping from their hair, their wet clothes clinging to them. Their hands were on each other's arms. The laughter died on their lips. They were suddenly, intensely, aware of the touch. The space between them vanished. He looked into her dark eyes, and he saw the rain reflected in them. He saw the memory of the fire, and he saw the deep, quiet strength that had held her family together. His gaze dropped to her mouth. She did not pull away. She did not breathe. The sound of the rain was a roar, sealing them off, enclosing them in that small space. He wanted, more than anything he had wanted in 5 long, empty years, to close the distance. He raised his good left hand, slowly, and brushed a wet strand of black hair from her cheek. His calloused fingers were rough against her skin. She leaned into the touch, just slightly, her eyes closing for a barest fraction of a second. A look of profound, aching vulnerability passed across her face. Then, from inside the house, Tianita called her name. The world rushed back in. The moment shattered. Kimala stepped back, her eyes dropping to the floor. Ethan pulled his hand away as if it had been burned all over again. He cleared his throat. He said, "We should get dry." He stepped back, holding the door open, and let her pass him. The rain passed as quickly as it had come. The desert, refreshed, exploded in a sudden fleeting bloom of green and yellow wildflowers. The air was clean, for a few days. The immediate threat seemed to have receded. The girls, emboldened by the new life, ventured farther from the house. Kimala had taught them to identify and gather wild berries and edible roots. One bright, clear afternoon, Cheno and Tianita took a small basket and walked to the shallow ravine. A few hundred yards from the house, it was rocky and sheltered, a perfect place to find the last of the season's sweet berries. They were laughing, their high, clear voices carrying on the air, two small figures intent on their happy task. They did not see the man on the ridge, a full half-mile away. Wade Kincaid lay flat on his belly in the rocks, his binoculars trained on them. He watched them for 10 minutes. He watched them fill their basket. He watched them scramble over the rocks, their small, quick movements like those of chipmunks. He noted the path they took. He noted how the deep gully of the ravine hid them completely from the view of the ranch house. A slow, ugly, and brilliant plan began to form in his mind. He did not need to burn the barn. He did not need to fight the rancher head-on. He just needed to wait for the right moment. He smiled, a cold, thin expression. He knew exactly how to create the chaos Marcus Hale wanted. He just had to take one of the little girls. The deep velvet black of a moonless night pressed against the ranch. It was hours past midnight, the time when the world holds its breath, when the only sounds were the chirp of crickets and the soft stamp of a horse in the corral. Ethan was not asleep. He was dozing in his chair, his boots on, his rifle leaning against the wall beside him. He had not slept soundly in weeks. He was listening. Camilla was also awake, her cot in the main room placed near the door to her children's new bedroom. Chaitin had arrived an hour after sunset. He had not ridden up. He had simply materialized from the twilight, a silent, unsettling presence. He had spoken in low tones to Camilla. He had found a fresh set of tracks. 3 riders, circling wide, well to the south. They were trying to be unseen, but they were not as skilled as they believed. He had come to watch. He now sat on the ground near the barn, his back against a corral post, completely invisible in the darkness. He, too, was listening. The first sound was almost too small to notice, a single, metallic tink. Ethan was on his feet, his rifle in his hand, his heart pounding. Then the night exploded in a chorus of high, frantic, jangling noise. The alarm bells. "Camilla!" Ethan yelled, his voice a harsh rasp. "I have them." Her voice came back, calm and tight with adrenaline. He heard the scrape of the bedroom door, the sound of small, frightened whispers. "Go, now," he commanded. He burst onto the porch. The air was thick with a new, sharp smell. Smoke, not wood smoke. It was the acrid chemical scent of lamp oil. The barn was not yet burning, but a thick, dark smoke was pouring from the open door of the hayloft. They had set the hay on fire. It was a lure, a trap. "Chaitin," Ethan called into the darkness. "I am here." Chaitin's voice was at his elbow. The man had moved like a ghost. "They want us in the barn," Ethan said, his mind racing. "They will be waiting at the front." "We do not go to the front," Chaitin said. He was already moving, a shadow flowing toward the back of the barn, toward the deep darkness near the creek bed. "You go right, I go left. We come up behind them." Ethan nodded in the dark. He watched as Camilla, a bundle of action, herded the 2 small, sleepy girls toward the root cellar. He saw the flicker of Chenoa's pale nightdress. And then they were gone, swallowed by the safety of the earth. The heavy cellar door thumped shut. They were safe. Now he could work. He sprinted, low to the ground, circling wide to the right. He used the line of the corral fence as cover. He could hear them now. 4 men, their low, eager voices carried in the still night air. They were near the main barn door, waiting in ambush. "Give it a minute," a gruff voice said. "He will come running when he sees the flames." A second voice laughed. "He and that Apache warrior both. This is easier than I thought. Kincaid wants them flushed. He does not care if they are breathing or not when we are done." The first small tongues of fire began to lick at the hayloft opening. The smoke was thick and black. Ethan was in position, kneeling behind a heavy water trough. He had a clear view of their backs. Chaitin was somewhere in the darkness to his left. Ethan raised his rifle, the cold metal smooth against his cheek. He did not want to kill. Not like this. He wanted a witness. He wanted justice. He aimed high at the roof of the barn, feet above the head of the man who had spoken. He fired. The rifle shot was a deafening crack that shattered the night. The bullet ripped through the wood siding with a high-pitched scream. "We are behind you," Ethan roared into the dark. "Drop your weapons." The four men, caught completely by surprise, spun around, firing wildly into the blackness. Bullets whined past Ethan's head, thudding into the water trough. A second shot came from the left. "Chiton!" It was not a warning shot. One of the men screamed, a high, thin sound, and clutched his shoulder, his rifle clattering to the ground. "It is a trap!" the gruff voice yelled. It was Wade Kincaid. Ethan recognized the sound of his rage. "Back to the horses! Go! Go!" Kincaid and two of his men turned and ran, firing back into the dark as they retreated toward the trees where they had left their mounts. Ethan heard the thunder of hooves. Fading fast, they were gone. But one man was left behind. He was on the ground, moaning, holding his shoulder. The barn fire was catching. The hay was roaring now, flames leaping into the sky. Ethan left the man on the ground. "Chiton, the horses! We have to get the horses!" He ran to the corral gate, his lungs burning from the smoke. He threw it open and slapped his buckskin on the rump, sending it and the mule galloping into the safety of the open pasture. Chiton was already inside the barn, not bothering with the smoke. He emerged a moment later, leading Kimala's pony, which was whinnying in terror. The other animals were gone. "The fire is too hot!" Ethan yelled. Grabbing a bucket, it was hopeless. The dry hay and old wood were an inferno. The barn, his barn, was going to be a total loss. He stopped. He let the bucket fall. He watched as the roof began to sag. He had lost his hay, his tools, his barn. "Ethan!" Chiton's voice was sharp. He was standing over the wounded man. Ethan turned, his fury a cold, hard knot in his stomach. He walked to the man, who was trying to crawl away. Ethan put his boot on the man's good leg, holding him fast. "Please!" the man gasped, his face pale in the firelight. "Do not kill me. It was just a job." "Who sent you?" Ethan asked, his voice deadly quiet. "It was Kincaid. It was Wade Kincaid." The man whimpered. "I know that. Who sent Kincaid?" "It was Mr. Hale. Marcus Hale. He paid us. He paid us all." Chiton knelt, his hand running over the man's pockets. He pulled something out and held it up. A small, wooden box. Ethan recognized the howling coyote on the label. "Coyote matches," Ethan said, his voice flat, the same as the last fire. The man was bleeding badly, but Chiton's shot had been precise. It had shattered the collarbone, but it had missed the lung. "Why?" Ethan demanded, pressing his boot down. "Why burn the barn?" "It was a distraction," the man sobbed, tears of pain and fear cutting trails in the soot on his face. "Kincaid, he wanted to draw you out, make you fight." "And then what?" The man hesitated, his eyes wide with a new terror. "And then what?" Ethan repeated. "It was the plan," the man gasped. "The real plan. He wanted the fire, he wanted it to spread." Ethan frowned, not understanding. "Spread where to the house?" "No," the man choked out. "Not the house. He said Mr. Hale said he wanted the fire to look like it got out of control. He wanted it to spread north. He wanted it to burn all the way to the Apache camp." The words fell into the roaring silence of the fire. Ethan stared at the man. Chiton, who had been listening, let out a low, dangerous sound. It had not just been a raid. It had not just been an attack on him. He had been a pawn. The plan was to burn his barn and have the fire, driven by the night wind, sweep north into the canyons, into the camps. It would be a massacre. And the blame, Ethan realized, would be placed on him. The white rancher, living with an Apache woman, in a supposed fit of rage or a drunken accident, had burned down his own barn and started a fire that wiped out the tribal lands. It was diabolical. It was the perfect excuse for Hale. He would have cleared the land, and he would have had the perfect story to tell the governor. Ethan looked at the man on the ground, his face twisted in pain. This was his witness. This was the proof Abigail Morse needed. "Chiton," Ethan said, "get me a rope and my saddlebags. We need to stop the bleeding. He is no good to us dead." Ethan's mind was working fast. The fury was still there, a cold, hard center, but it was now overlaid with a sickening dread. This was bigger than he had ever imagined. He was not just protecting a family. He was standing in the way of a full-scale war. He bound the man's wound, pulling the bandage tight with a grim satisfaction as the man hissed in pain. He tied his hands and feet. By dawn, the barn was a smoking, black skeleton. The sun rose on a scene of total devastation. Camilla and the girls had emerged from the cellar, their faces pale and streaked with soot. The girls ran to their mother, burying their faces in her dress. Camilla looked at the ruin of the barn, then at Ethan, then at the bound prisoner sitting against the water trough. She said nothing. Her eyes asked the question. Ethan told her. He told her what the man had said. He watched her face turn from fear to a cold, profound anger that matched his own. He dispatched Chiton at first light. "Ride to town. Do not go to the sheriff. Go to Abigail Morse. Tell her I have a witness and the proof. Tell her I'm bringing him in. Tell her to meet me at the town hall, and tell her to bring Sheriff Collier, whether he likes it or not." Chiton nodded once and was gone, his pony a blur against the rising sun. Ethan looked at his prisoner. Then he looked at Camilla. He said he was sorry about the barn. She walked over to him. She looked at the smoking timbers, the loss of their winter hay, their tools. Then she looked at her daughters, who were already huddled together, comforting each other. She said it was only wood. Ethan knew, in that moment, that this was far from over. Wade Kincaid was still out there, and Kincaid would have to report his failure to Marcus Hale. Far away, Wade Kincaid rode his horse into the main yard of the Double H Ranch. He did not bother to dismount. Marcus Hale was on the porch, a cup of morning coffee in his hand. Kincaid told him. He told him about the alarm, the ambush, the man they had lost. Hale listened, his expression unchanged. He sipped his coffee. He looked at the northern hills, where no new smoke column had risen. He said, "So, the rancher is smarter than he looks, and now he has a man who talks." Kincaid said he could ride back. He could finish it. Hale shook his head. "No, not now. The rancher will be expecting you, and he will be bringing that witness to town. He will try to use the law." Haley was silent for a moment, calculating. Then he smiled. He said, "It is a shame, a real shame, all that trouble just to protect two little children. It would be terrible if something happened to one of them. Terrible." Kincaid understood. The plan had changed. It was no longer about fire. It was about leverage. He turned his horse. He knew exactly what he had to do. He knew the girls went to the ravine to pick berries. The morning after the fire was a bleak, silent thing. The sun rose on a landscape of ash. The barn, which had been the solid, oaken heart of the ranch, was a blackened skeleton, still sending up lazy, bitter plumes of smoke. The prisoner, his name a whimpered Silas, was tied securely in the small grain shed, the only structure, apart from the house, that had been spared. Ethan and Camilla stood side by side, looking at the ruin. The loss was total. His tools, his forge, his saddles, and a winter's worth of hay, all of it was gone. He felt a familiar, cold hollowness, the same numbness that had followed him from Missouri. It was the feeling of work undone, of a life being systematically unraveled. "It is only wood," Camilla had said, but it was more than wood. It was his anchor, and it was gone. Chenoa and Tyanita were huddled on the porch steps, their small faces pale. The night of terror had marked them. They did not speak, but just watched their mother and Ethan, their eyes wide with the understanding that their world was, once again, unsafe. Ethan had spent the first hours of light moving his remaining stock. His buckskin, the mule, and Camella's pony were now picketed in the small, grassy pasture near the creek. The cow, luckily, had been in the same pasture and had been spared. He had a prisoner to deliver, but he was a rancher with no ranch. Around noon, the sky, which had been a clear, unforgiving blue, began to change. A strange, yellowish light filtered down. The air grew heavy, static, and suddenly cold. The wind, which had fanned the flames the night before, died completely. "A storm," Camilla said, looking up, her hand shielding her eyes. "A strong one." "It is late in the season for this," Ethan murmured. Then he remembered. Beside the smoking ruin of the barn, covered by a large, heavy canvas tarp, was a small, high stack of cured hay he had cut just last week. It was not much, not enough for winter, but it was all they had left. If that driving rain hit the tarp, it would pool, break through, and ruin the last of their feed. The first drops, as large and heavy as coins, began to strike the red dust. "We have to secure it," Ethan yelled. "If we can get it onto the porch, we can save it." It was a desperate, foolish idea. The stack was heavy, and the porch was 50 yards away. But it was something. It was work. It was a refusal to be beaten. He ran toward the stack, his good left arm pumping. Camilla, understanding instantly, ran with him. The sky opened. The rare desert downpour did not just rain. It fell in a solid, deafening sheet. They reached the stack, soaked to the skin in seconds. "Pull the tarp," he shouted over the roar of the water. "We will drag it." They each grabbed a corner. The canvas was slick, heavy with the sudden water. They pulled, their boots sliding in the instant mud. The haystack, now also getting wet, resisted. "Together," he yelled. "Now!" They heaved, their muscles straining. The stack slid a few feet, then caught. The rain was so hard it was like being pelted with gravel. It was cold, and Ethan's shirt was plastered to his skin. He saw Camilla, her black hair undone by the storm, water streaming down her face. She was not complaining. She was not frightened. She was pulling with all her might, her jaw set, her eyes fixed on the house. He felt a sudden, wild surge of shared, stubborn life. They were in this together. They pulled again, and the stack moved, sliding through the mud. A ridiculous, desperate arc. They laughed, a sudden, shared bark of absurdity and effort. They were soaked, filthy, and fighting a rainstorm for a handful of hay. And it was the most alive he had felt in 5 years. They dragged it, foot by painful foot, until it was bumping against the porch steps. They were both gasping, their lungs heaving. "Get on the porch," he said. "I will try to lift it." "No," she panted. "We lift together." They scrambled onto the low porch, the water cascading from the roof in a solid curtain. They reached down, grabbed the sodden canvas, and with a final, groaning effort, hauled the front end of the stack up onto the wooden planks. It was safe. It was mostly dry. They collapsed against the house wall, side by side, hidden behind the silver curtain of the rain. The world was reduced to the small, dry space of the porch and the deafening, rhythmic drumming of the water on the tin roof. It was a sound so loud it drowned out thought, drowned out the world, drowned out Marcus Hale and Wade Kincaid. They sat there for a long minute, catching their breath, water dripping from their hair, forming puddles at their feet. Ethan turned to her. His voice was rough, low. "You were good last night. With the girls, you did not panic. You got them to the cellar. You did the plan." Camilla was looking out at the rain, her profile serene in the gray light. "It was a good plan," she said simply. I am a mother. I do not have the luxury of panic. Still, he said, the words feeling clumsy in his mouth. You were brave. Braver than I was. She turned to face him. Her wet clothes clung to her. He saw the strength in her shoulders, but he also saw the exhaustion in her eyes. You are brave in your way. Ethan, you fight with paper. You fight with walls. You face men in the dark. We are just different. He looked at her, and the moment from the first rainstorm returned, the one broken by her daughter's call. This time, there was no call. There was only the sound of the rain. He looked at her hand, and then he looked at his own, the right one, still wrapped in a bandage, though the burn was healing underneath. My hand, he said, holding it up. It is healing. Your herbs, they helped. Camilla looked at his bandaged hand. She did not speak. She slowly, gently, reached out and took his wrist. Her fingers were cool from the rain. She held his hand, turning it over, examining the clumsy wrapping. She raised her eyes to his. In their dark depths, he saw gratitude and partnership and something else, something deep and warm and vulnerable. She leaned forward. He did not move. He barely breathed. She pressed her lips, soft and warm, against the rough bandage covering his palm. It was not a kiss of passion. It was a kiss of healing. It was a kiss on the wound he had taken for her children. The touch went through him like a lightning strike, a jolt of pure, clean fire. He had forgotten what this felt like, the touch of another person, the simple, profound connection, his numbness, the 5-year winter in his soul, cracked. His good left hand, acting of its own accord, came up. He did not touch her face. He cupped the back of her head, his fingers tangling in her wet hair. He drew her toward him. She did not resist. She met him halfway. He kissed her. It was not a gentle kiss. It was desperate. It was the kiss of a man drowning, and the kiss of a woman who was an anchor. It was all the unsaid words of the past weeks. It was the smoke, the fear, the shared work at the well, the laughter in the rain. It was fierce, and it was deep, and it was absolutely, terrifyingly real. He felt her body soften against his, her hands coming up to rest on his chest. For a long, endless moment, there was no fire, no ruin, no prisoner. There was only the porch, the rain, and her. They broke apart, slowly, their foreheads resting against each other. They were both breathing fast. Camilla was the first to pull back, a small, shaky, and utterly beautiful smile touching her lips. She looked flustered, young. Ethan felt like a clumsy boy. Camilla, he whispered, the name a prayer. She put a finger to his lips. I know, she whispered. They looked at each other, and they both understood. This was real, but it was not safe. The world was still waiting, just outside the curtain of the rain. When this is done, he said, his voice thick. When hail is beaten. When you and the girls are safe. She nodded, her eyes shining. When it is safe, she agreed. We will call this by its name. A sudden, high-pitched shriek of pure delight broke the spell. Tianita, her fear of the night forgotten in the joy of the day, burst from the house, her bare feet slapping the porch. She ran past them and leaped into the yard, holding her face up to the sky, letting the water soak her. Chenoa was right behind her, more hesitant, but she saw her sister laughing and ran to join her. The two girls danced in the red mud, spinning in circles, their laughter as clear and as clean as the rain itself. Ethan and Camilla stood on the porch, side by side, not touching, and watched them. It was a glimpse, a tiny, heartbreaking glimpse of a future that might, just possibly, exist. A family, whole and safe, and laughing in the rain. The peace lasted for 4 hours. The rain stopped as abruptly as it had begun, leaving the air washed clean and the earth steaming. The prisoner, Silas, was fed. The horses were checked. The reality of their situation returned. just as the sun was beginning to set, casting long, dramatic shadows from the giant saguaros. Chiton returned. He did not ride in. He appeared at the edge of the creek bed, his pony lathered. He had ridden all day and all night and all day again. His face was a mask of grim urgency. Ethan and Camilla met him by the porch. "Abigail Morse has the message," Chiton said, his voice a low rasp. "She will be at the town hall tomorrow at noon. She will have Collier. She said to tell you she will bring the paper storm." Ethan nodded. "Good. We will leave at dawn. Me and—" He gestured toward the grain shed. "Our witness." "No," Chiton said. A cold dread seized Ethan. "What do you mean? No." "I circled wide on my way back," Chiton said, his eyes scanning the ridges. "Even now, in the fading light. I cut their trail. The ones from last night. They did not go back to the Double H." "Where did they go?" Camilla asked, her hand going to her throat. "They are in the canyons, hiding, waiting. And they are not alone. I found the tracks of a larger group. Maybe 5, maybe 6 more riders. They are meeting Kincaid. They are blocking the pass to the south. And," he said, his gaze hardening, "there is another group, smaller, in the hills to the east." Ethan understood. Kincaid was not running. He was surrounding them. He was setting a trap. He knew Ethan had the prisoner. He knew Ethan had to go to town. Kincaid was going to make sure he never arrived. "We cannot go to town," Ethan said, the new, fragile hope from the rainstorm turning to ash. "We cannot get through." "We cannot stay here," Camilla said, looking at the ruin of the barn. "We have no defenses left." Ethan's mind was racing. "The stock. We have to hide the stock. That small canyon, 2 miles up the creek. It is hidden. We can move the horses and the cow there tonight. They will be safe." He looked at Chiton. "We need more alarms. We need—" He stopped. His plan was falling apart. They were trapped. "We will do this," he said, his voice hard, forcing the fear down. "We do this tonight. We move the animals. We double the watch. Silas, he stays in the shed. Kincaid wants him. He has to come here to get him. We will be ready." He looked at Camilla. "The girls do not leave the house. Not for any reason." The plan was set. It was a desperate, defensive crouch. It was not fast enough. Wade Kincaid was not planning a siege. He was a hunter, and he had already chosen his prey. The next morning, the sky was a pale, clear gray. Half an hour before sunrise, the ranch was still, bathed in the quiet, pre-dawn light. Ethan was in the grain shed, checking the ropes on Silas, preparing him for a move, if it came to that. Camilla was in the house, boiling water for coffee, her movements tense. Chiton was on the ridge, a silent watcher. Chenoa, the oldest, the responsible one, woke up. She knew the pony, the one Chiton had saved, was in the creek pasture. She knew it had been frightened by the fire. She wanted to give it the small apple she had saved. Quietly, so as not to wake her sister, she slipped on her moccasins. She eased the front door open, a tiny crack, and slipped out. She was just going to the pasture. It was only 50 yards. She would be back before her mother even knew she was gone. She ran, a small, swift shadow, across the damp earth, toward the sound of the creek. She never saw them. They had been lying in the creek bed, in the mud and wet rocks, all night. 2 men. They had crawled past Chiton's perimeter in the dark. They had been waiting for exactly this. Chenoa reached the pony. It whickered a soft greeting. She held out the apple. A hand, smelling of tobacco and leather, clamped over her mouth. A thick arm wrapped around her waist, lifting her off the ground. She kicked, her body frantic. But the man was immensely strong. She dropped the apple. A second man, his face masked by a bandana, grabbed the pony's rope. They did not run. They moved back into the creek bed, using the shallow ravine as a perfect covered exit. The last thing Chenoa saw was her home, small and quiet, unaware of what had just happened. When Camilla called her name, 10 minutes later, there was no answer. When she saw the open door, a cold dread seized her. She ran outside. Ethan, hearing the rising panic in her voice, ran from the shed. They found it together. Not a body, not a sign of a struggle, just a single half-eaten red apple lying in the mud near the fresh, deep tracks of two men. And beside the tracks, placed with deliberate, terrible care, was a single gray and white eagle feather. It was a feather Ethan did not recognize, but Chaitin, when he arrived, his face a mask of stone, would know it. It was the mark of the Tonto, a rival Apache band that lived 100 miles to the north. The false trail was laid, the trap was sprung. Camilla did not scream. The sound that tore from her throat was worse. It was a low, tearing gasp, the sound of a life being ripped in half. She fell to her knees, her hand outstretched, touching the mud where the small, discarded apple lay. Ethan saw the world go red at the edges, the fragile, rain-washed peace of the day before, the shared kiss on the porch, the laughter of the children, all of it evaporated, leaving only a core of glacial, killing rage. Chaitin was there, appearing from the ridge as if summoned by the pain. He knelt, his face a mask of stone. He looked at the tracks of the two men. He saw where they had dragged the pony. He picked up the gray and white eagle feather. His lip curled. "Tonto," he said, his voice thick with contempt. "This is a lie. The Tonto have not hunted this valley in 10 winters." "Kincaid," Ethan said, the name like a piece of glass in his mouth. "He wants a war," Chaitin said, his eyes scanning the northern hills. "He wants to blame the Tonto for the girl, so Hale can demand the governor send soldiers. He is staging a scene." Where? Camilla was on her feet, her face transformed. The mother was gone, replaced by a predator. Where did they take her? Chaitin pointed north, toward the jagged, broken land. "There is only one place a man would stage an ambush and call it a discovery: Horse Thief Gulch. It is where rustlers have always hidden their herds. It is a box canyon, a perfect trap." Camilla ran for her pony. Ethan ran for his buckskin, his rifle already in his hand. "Wait!" a new voice called out. A high, sharp voice. A buggy was rattling up the path, moving far too fast. Abigail Morse was handling the reins, and beside her, looking pale and miserable, was Sheriff Collier. "We were coming to see about the prisoner." Collier stammered, his eyes going wide at the scene. He saw the burned barn, the tied prisoner in the shed, and now the 3 figures, armed for war. "They took her," Ethan said, his voice flat. He did not have time for this. "Kincaid took the girl." "My God," Abigail breathed, taking in the tracks, the apple, the feather. "He is not just forcing your hand. He is setting the whole territory on fire. He is manufacturing a war." Camilla ran back from the house, pulling a frantic, crying Tianita by the hand. She stopped in front of Abigail. The 2 women looked at each other. Camilla, the mother of the earth. Abigail, the mother of the law. "You are the paper warrior," Camilla said, her voice shaking but hard. "I am giving you my other child. Protect her, as I go to get the first." She pushed Tianita toward the buggy. Tianita screamed, "No, Mama, no!" Abigail, her face white, reached down and pulled the little girl up onto her lap. "I will protect her, Camilla, with my life." Ethan turned to Collier. The sheriff was just sitting there, frozen. "My witness," Ethan barked, pointing to the shed. "His name is Silas. He confessed. Hale's man. He is your prisoner. You take him, and you take this child, and you get them to the jail. You lock them in. Do you understand me?" Collier, finally shamed into action by the raw, undeniable reality of the crime, nodded. "I will." "Chaitin, Camilla, let's ride," Ethan said. The 3 of them spurred their horses. leaping the broken fence line and galloping north. Behind them, they heard Tianita's small, desperate wail, "Mama!" until it was swallowed by the sound of the wind. They did not speak, they rode as one. A single instrument of pursuit. Chiton led, his eyes on the ground, reading the story of the two men, the small pony, and the struggling child. They had moved fast. They rode through the shallow, dry creek beds, their horses' hooves kicking up the damp sand. They wound through narrow, rocky defiles that tore at their legs. Kimela rode with a reckless, desperate speed that terrified Ethan. He saw her face. She was seeing only Chenoa. He was the cold one. His mind was a machine, calculating, planning. His rage was a fuel, burning clean and hot. After an hour, Chiton stopped, raising his hand. They were at the mouth of the gulch. It was a narrow slit in a high wall of red rock, barely wide enough for a wagon. Chiton dismounted and crept forward. He returned a minute later. "They are in there, a mile deep. I see smoke, a small fire." "The stage," Ethan said. "They are not waiting for us," Chiton whispered. "They are waiting for their audience. The men Kincaid is bringing to discover this Tonto camp." As if to prove his words, a thin, red spark shot into the morning sky from deep within the canyon. A signal flare. "He is calling them," Chiton said, his voice grim. "The main party. They will be here soon." "We are out of time," Kimela said. She slid her rifle from its scabbard. Ethan looked at the high, sheer walls of the canyon. "They will be watching the entrance. They expect the rescue to come from the front. That is where they will have their rifles." He looked at Kimela. "You and Chiton, go in, make noise, draw their fire, keep them busy." Chiton looked at him as if he were insane. "And you?" "I am going over the top," Ethan said, looking up at the jagged cliff face. "I will come down on them from the slope, from behind." Chiton studied the cliff, then looked at Ethan's bandaged hand. He said nothing, but his eyes showed a new, grudging respect. 10 minutes. We will give you 10 minutes. Then we go in." Ethan did not wait. He swung off his horse and ran to the canyon wall. He found a fissure, a small crack. He jammed his boot in. He began to climb. It was brutal. The rock was sharp. He hauled himself up, his good left arm bearing all his weight. His healing right hand was a club of fire. He bit his lip until he tasted blood. Refusing to make a sound, he climbed, his lungs burning, his muscles screaming. He reached the rim. He lay flat, gasping, looking down. He saw them. It was exactly as Chiton had predicted. A small, clear space in the canyon. 2 men, the ones who had taken her, were sitting by a small fire. Chenoa was there. She was alive. She was tied to a scrub pine, her face tear-stained but defiant. Her pony was picketed nearby. And Wade Kincaid was there. He was pacing, impatient. "When the main group gets here," Kincaid said, his voice echoing in the enclosed space, "we shoot these 2. We make it look like they fought us when we tried to rescue the girl. The Tonto get the blame, Hale gets his war, and everyone is happy." Ethan's blood turned to ice. He slid his rifle forward. Down below, at the mouth of the canyon, a shot rang out. "Chiton!" The bullet ricocheted off the wall near the camp. "They are here," Kincaid yelled, surprised. "Get to cover. It is the rancher." Kincaid and his 2 men dove behind a cluster of boulders. Their rifles pointed down the canyon. They began firing. This was his moment. Ethan did not aim for Kincaid. He aimed for the man closest to Chenoa. He aimed for his rifle hand. He fired. The man screamed as his rifle flew from his grasp. "Chenoa!" Ethan roared. "Get down! Cover your head!" He did not climb down. He half ran, half slid, down the steep scree slope, a one-man avalanche of rock and fury. Kincaid spun around, his face a mask of shock, realizing he had been flanked. Kimela, seeing Ethan attack from above, broke cover. She was not a soldier. She was a mother. She sprinted from the rocks at the canyon mouth, running straight for her daughter, her rifle held at her hip. The second man, the one Ethan had not shot, turned and raised his rifle to fire at the running woman. Camilla did not stop. She did not slow. She fired from the hip. The shot was pure instinct. It struck the man in the shoulder, spinning him around and knocking him to the ground. She reached Chenoa in a heartbeat, her knife flashing as she cut the ropes. "Run!" she shrieked. "Run to your uncle!" Chenoa scrambled away, disappearing into the rocks where Chiton was providing covering fire. Now it was just Ethan and Wade Kincaid. The two men were 20 yards apart, separated by the smoking campfire and a jumble of granite boulders. "You should have stayed in your hole, rancher," Kincaid snarled, firing a shot that chipped the rock by Ethan's head. "This was never your fight." "You brought the fight to my home," Ethan yelled back, his voice cold. He was not angry anymore. He was steady. "You burned my barn. You took her child." "She is just an—" Kincaid was arrogant. He stood up from his cover, trying to get a clear shot at the man on the slope. Ethan fired. He did not hesitate. He did not aim to kill. He aimed for the shoulder. The bullet struck with a heavy, wet thud. Kincaid screamed, his gun arm going limp. His rifle dropped into the dust. He staggered, clutching his ruined shoulder. Ethan stood up and walked down the slope, his rifle never wavering. He stopped a few feet from Kincaid, who had slumped to his knees. "It is over, Kincaid." "You are a dead man." Kincaid gasped, blood bubbling from his lips. "Hale Willie will skin you." "Hale," Ethan said. He pressed the hot barrel of his rifle against Kincaid's good shoulder. "I want to hear you say it. Go to—" Ethan pressed harder. "Say it. Who gave the order for the first fire? For the barn? For the girl?" Kincaid looked up, his eyes filled with hate, but he also saw the cold, pure justice in Ethan's gaze. He saw a man who had lost everything once and was not afraid to lose it again. Kincaid broke. "Hale!" He spat, the word a curse. It was always Hale. He wanted the land, he wanted the war, the fires, the barn taking the girl. It was all his plan. All of it. Hale. "He said it loud enough for you. Sheriff, Ethan turned his head. Abigail Morse was standing not 20 feet away, her small notebook in her hand. Beside her, his face the color of old parchment, was Sheriff Collier, his shotgun held, shaking, in his hands. "We took the child and the prisoner to the jail." Collier stammered. "Abigail, she said you would be here. She said you would need the law to witness this." "And it seems we have arrived just in time for a full confession," Abigail said, her pencil flying across the page. "Sheriff, I believe you have a duty to record Mr. Kincaid's statement and to arrest him." Abigail walked past Ethan, straight to the wounded, kneeling Kincaid. "Wade Kincaid, you are under arrest." She did not hesitate. She began searching his pockets. "I would also like to see the contents of your vest." She pulled out a small, leather-bound ledger. She flipped it open. Her eyes widened. Well, Silas, $10. Barn fire, $20. This is meticulous." From his other pocket, she pulled a familiar box of coyote matches. "This," she said, holding the book and the matches up to Collier, "is what you call corroborating evidence." A new sound echoed in the canyon, a dozen horses moving fast. "That is them," Kincaid gasped, a flicker of hope in his eyes. "That is the main party. You are all dead." A moment later, Marcus Hale rode into the clearing. He was followed by 5 of his Double H men and, lagging behind them, a group of smaller, nervous-looking ranchers, the men from Red Butte. "What is the meaning of this?" Hale boomed, his eyes taking in the scene. He saw Ethan. He saw Collier and Abigail. He saw Kincaid on the ground. His face darkened. "We saw the signal. Kincaid, what—" "He has confessed, Marcus," Sheriff Collier said. His voice was shaking, but for the first time since Ethan had known him, it held a core of steel. Hale's face went white. "He is lying," Kincaid yelled, trying to get to his feet. "I found the girl. I was rescuing her from these two." He pointed at his own wounded men. "The Tonto they ran. He shot me. The rancher he shot me." "A noble story, Mr. Hale," Abigail said, stepping forward, her small frame radiating authority. "But it does not explain this payment ledger, or the confession of Silas, who is currently in a cell, or the coyote matches we found on your foreman, just as we found at the first fire." "This is nonsense," Hale roared. "My word against a lying wounded cowhand and this interfering woman." "It is not just their word, Hale." A new voice spoke. One of the small ranchers, a man named Jedediah, rode his horse forward. He and the other ranchers looked nervous, but also angry. "We came along. You said we were going to find a Tonto camp, that you had proof. We wanted to see for ourselves." Another rancher spoke up. "But we did not see a Tonto camp. We rode in just in time to hear your man here." He pointed at Kincaid. "Admit it was all your plan." A third man, his face weathered, looked at Hale with pure contempt. "You told us the Apache were rustling, but it was your men. Hale, I saw them cut Ethan's fence. I saw them drive your cattle onto his land. You lied to us." Hale looked at the faces of his neighbors. He saw no fear. He saw only disgust. He had pushed them too far. He had squeezed them, stolen their water, and now he had tried to make them accessories to a war. His paid men looked at the ranchers, then at the sheriff, and they did not move to help him. "This is a misunderstanding," Hale said, his voice small. "A misunderstanding," Kincaid shrieked, seeing that he was being abandoned. "I did what you told me to do. You told me to burn them out. You told me to create a situation. You told me to take the girl to start a war. It was you, all you." Sheriff Collier walked forward. He was no longer pale. He pulled his handcuffs from his belt. "Marcus Hale, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, for arson, and for the kidnapping of a minor." Hale's two bodyguards, seeing the power shift in a final, irreversible way, stepped back, leaving their employer to his fate. "You cannot be serious. Collier, you are finished," Hale hissed as the sheriff snapped the metal cuffs onto his wrists. Hale, defeated, his empire crumbling in a dusty canyon, turned his eyes on Ethan. Camilla was now at his side, holding a shaking Chenoa, whose face was buried in her mother's dress. Chaitin stood guard over the prisoners. Hale's voice was a low, venomous whisper. "This is not over, rancher. You think this stops me? You think a Red Butte jail can hold me? I own the territorial judges. You will have your day in this little court, but I will have my justice. There are other ways than this. A man's money, his political connections, there are always other ways." Ethan just watched him, his rifle still held steady. He had won. He had his proof. He had the prisoner, and Camilla had her daughter. But as he watched Hale being led away, the man's final threat echoed in the gulch, a promise of a new, colder kind of war. The ride back from Horse Thief Gulch was a slow, grim procession. It was not a victory parade. It was the hauling of a great sickness out of the hills. Ethan and Chaitin rode in front, their rifles across their laps. Behind them, Sheriff Collier and Abigail Morse rode in her buggy, Tianita a small, silent bundle on her lap. Behind them came the prisoners, Kincaid and his two wounded men, their hands tied, slumped over their saddles. And at the rear, ringed by the other ranchers, the men who had come to see a Tonto camp and had found a conspiracy, rode Marcus Hale. Hale rode with his head high, his cuffed hands resting on his saddle horn. He looked straight ahead, his face a mask of cold fury. He was a king in chains, and he still carried the air of a man who believed the chains were a temporary inconvenience. When they reached the edge of town, the main street was empty. But as they passed the mercantile and the saloon, people came out. They stood on the boardwalks. their faces a mixture of confusion, shock, and dawning comprehension. They saw Marcus Hale, the man who owned their bank in their minds, being let in like a common rustler. They reached the jail. Collier, his voice now a firm, official bark, had Jedediah and the other ranchers help him move the prisoners from their horses into the two small, dark cells. Silas, who had been in the first cell, cringed against the wall as his employer and his foreman were shoved in beside him. The moment the cell door clanged shut, Kimela slid from her pony. Tianita, seeing her, let out a single, piercing cry. "Mama!" Kimela ran and pulled her from the buggy. She did not cry. She just held her daughter, rocking back and forth, her face buried in the child's hair, breathing in the scent of her. Chenoa, who had been riding silently behind Chiton, slid down and joined them, wrapping her small arms around her mother and her sister. The three of them stood in the red dust, a single, indivisible knot of survival. Abigail Morse climbed down from the buggy, her movement stiff. She looked at Ethan. "Noon, Mr. Matthews, at the town hall. We will make this official." The town hall was not a court. It was a large, hot room with wooden benches and a raised platform at one end. By noon, it was filled. Every seat was taken. Men stood 3 deep along the back wall. The air was thick with sweat and the smell of unasked questions. Ethan and Kimela sat in the front row, Kimela's family. Chenoa and Tianita sat on either side of her. Chiton stood against the wall, his arms folded, his eyes missing nothing. Sheriff Collier brought the prisoners in. They were cuffed, Hale, Kincaid, and Silas. They sat on a bench, guarded by Jedediah and another rancher, both of whom now wore deputy badges, freshly issued by Collier. Abigail Morse stood on the platform. She did not have a gavel. She just had a stack of papers. She began to speak, her voice clear and sharp, cutting through the murmuring. She did not make a speech. She built a case, piece by methodical piece. First, she held up the small, charred coyote match Ethan had found at the first fire, the one that had saved the girls. She entered it into the record. Second, she called Ethan to the platform. He told his story, his voice flat and low. He told of the smoke, the screams, the broken wall, the smell of pine oil, and the match. Third, she called Silas. The man was shaking. He could barely speak. He told them of Kincaid's order. He told them of the plan to burn the barn, to make the fire spread north, to burn out the Apache camps and blame Ethan for the entire tragedy. Fourth, she held up the leather ledger she had taken from Kincaid's pocket. She read the entries aloud. Silas, $10 for the barn. Powder and fuse, $5. Payment, 2 riders, Horse Thief Gulch, $20. The room was dead silent. Fifth, she held up the box of coyote matches, also from Kincaid's pocket. Finally, she turned to the ranchers who had been with Hale. "Mr. Jedediah," she said, "please tell this room what you heard Wade Kincaid say in the gulch after he had been shot." Jedediah stood up, his hat in his hands. He was a simple man. He looked at Hale, his eyes full of a new, cold anger. He said, "I heard him confess. I heard him say that Hale, Mr. Hale right there, gave him the orders to set the fires, to take the little girl, to start a war so he could get more land. I heard him say it with my own ears. We all did." A low, deep groan moved through the room. It was the sound of a community realizing it had been fooled, used, and lied to. Hale lunged to his feet. "This is a farce. It is the word of a hired fool and a group of small-time sodbusters against mine. I demand to be released." "You are not in your bank, Mr. Hale," Abigail said, her voice like ice. "You are in a court of territorial law, and the evidence is overwhelming." Sheriff Collier stood up. He unrolled a long sheet of paper. Sheriff Raymond Collier, have recorded this testimony. The evidence and the prisoners will be transported by the territorial marshals to the capital. They will stand trial for conspiracy, for arson, and for kidnapping. He looked at the room. As the legal authority in this county, I am also issuing 2 immediate orders. First, all grazing and mineral rights held by Marcus Hale are suspended. Pending the outcome of the trial, his assets are frozen. A gasp went through the room. Collier had just cut the legs out from under Hale's empire. Second, Collier continued, his voice louder. A legal order of protection is hereby issued for Ethan Matthews, for Camilla, and for their children. Anyone approaching that ranch with ill intent will be arrested on sight. That is all. Hale, his face purple, said nothing. He had made his threat in the canyon. He knew this first battle was lost. He sat down, a defeated man. The hearing was over. As people filed out into the bright, harsh sunlight, the mood was different. The anger was gone, replaced by a deep, communal shame. Jedediah and the other ranchers walked up to Ethan. Jedediah stuck out his hand. "Ethan," he said, his voice rough. "We did not see it. He told us you were the problem. We listened. We were wrong." Ethan looked at the man's calloused hand. Then he took it. He shook it. "We all have to live here." "Jed," he said. Another man, one Ethan did not even know, stepped up. He looked at Camilla. "Ma'am," he said, twisting his hat. "What he did, using your girl, it was not right. I just want to say, I am sorry, for my part in it, for believing the lies." Camilla, holding Tyanita's hand, just looked at him. She saw the shame in his eyes. She gave a single, slow nod. It was acceptance. It was enough. The next few weeks were quiet. The territorial marshals came and took Hale and his men away. The Double H Ranch fell into chaos, its foreman unpaid, its cattle wandering. The threat that had hung over the territory for a year was just gone. Ethan and Camilla's life fell into a new rhythm. They worked, they ate, they taught the girls to read. In the evenings, they sat on the porch. The silence between them was no longer awkward. It was comfortable. It was the sound of 2 people who had been through a fire and come out the other side. The memory of the kiss on the rain-soaked porch was always there. It was a promise, waiting. One evening, after the girls were asleep, Ethan stayed in the grain shed. He lit a lantern. He had a small forge he had rescued from the barn's embers. He had a piece of silver. It was $3 silver, melted down. He worked late, the small, clean ting, ting, ting of his hammer the only sound. A week later, he sat with Camilla on the porch. The sun was setting, painting the mesas in shades of orange and deep purple. He cleared his throat. It felt tighter than it had when he faced Kincaid. "Camilla," he started. She turned to him, her hands still. That paper, the one we signed with Abigail, the partnership. It is good paper. It is strong." "Yes," she said, her voice quiet. "It is good." "But it is not," he struggled. "It is not the whole truth. Not anymore, not for me." He reached into his pocket. His hand was shaking. Not his healing right hand, but his strong left. He pulled out a small, silver ring. It was not perfect. It was a little rough, but the silver shone in the twilight. He had carved a shape into the flat top. "I asked Abigail," he said, looking at the ring instead of at her. "She told me what your name means. Camilla. She said it means butterfly." He held the ring out. The carving was unmistakable. A small, delicate butterfly, its wings spread. "I do not have a ranch, not really," he said, his voice a low, rough whisper. "The barn is gone. I have debts for seed. I do not have anything to offer, except this, and my name." He finally looked at her. Her eyes were shining. "Camilla, I am asking if you will be my wife. Not as a debt, not as a partnership to keep you safe. I am asking you to be my family. The family I chose, the family I want." She did not answer for a long time. She just looked at him, her face open, all her strength and all her sorrow visible. Then, the smile he had seen only a few times. the one that started deep inside and lit her from within, spread across her face. She held out her left hand. "Yes, Ethan Matthews," she said. "I will be your wife." He slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. From the shadows of the corral, a figure stepped forward. Chiton. He had been there, as he always was, watching. He walked up the porch steps. He looked at Ethan. He looked at his sister. He placed his hand on Ethan's shoulder. It was heavy and strong. Then he placed his other hand on Kimmela's. He spoke, not in English, but in the low, rhythmic words of his people. It was a blessing. It was a giving away. It was an acceptance. Chenoa and Tianita, hearing the voices, ran out. They saw the ring. They saw their mother's face. They understood. They danced around them, a swirl of pure joy. The wedding was held 1 week later. It was not held in a church. It was held on the high patch of grass by the house, the grass that had come in green and sweet after the rains. The whole town came. Jedediah was there, and the other ranchers. Abigail Morse was there. Not as a lawyer, but as a friend. Even Sheriff Collier came, his badge polished. It was 2 weddings in one. First, Chiton stood with them. He lit a small bundle of sage, and the clean, holy smoke drifted over them. He sang a low, quiet song, a song of blessing for a new home. Then, Abigail Morse stepped forward, a small black book in her hand. She said, "We are gathered here under the law of the territory." She read the simple, strong words. Ethan, his voice thick, said, "I will." Kimmela, her voice clear as a bell, said, "I will." When she said they were man and wife, Ethan did not kiss her. He just took her hand, the one with the butterfly ring, and held it. There was a polite applause. Then Jedediah stepped forward. "That was lovely, ma'am," he said to Abigail. "Now, the work." Ethan looked confused. Jedediah whistled. From the main road, a line of wagons appeared. They were not filled with wedding gifts. They were filled with lumber, with tools, with sacks of nails and rolls of barbed wire. "We passed a hat," Jedediah said, looking at his boots. "After Hale was gone, we figured you needed a barn. A man cannot ranch without a barn." The men of Red Butte, the same men who had whispered about him, drove their wagons onto his land. They unhitched their teams. They pulled out saws and hammers. The women, meanwhile, began setting up tables, unloading baskets of food, fried chicken, bread, pies. It was a barn raising. It was their apology. Ethan stood, speechless. He looked at Kimmela. She was smiling. That night, after a full day of work, as the skeleton of a new, larger barn stood against the stars, Ethan and Kimmela sat at their table. Abigail Morse had one last set of papers. "The partnership agreement," she said. "The final one, and the will." The new deed listed them as equal partners, co-owners of the land, the stock, and the home. The will left everything to the surviving spouse, and then, in equal parts, to Chenoa and Tianita Matthews. Ethan signed his name. Kimmela signed hers, her letters slow and careful, the ones he had taught her. "It is done," Abigail said, folding the papers. "Legally, in every way." Ethan looked at his wife. "This makes it right," he said, "for the world." Kimmela reached across the table and placed her hand over his. "It was always right, in here," she said. "The paper is for our daughters." Time, in the Arizona Territory, was measured not by clocks but by the slow, inevitable turning of the seasons. The green that had burst forth after the rains slowly faded to a deep, healthy gold. The new barn, a monument to a community's apology, stood tall and strong, its fresh pine boards smelling of resin and promise. It was larger than the old one, built by many hands, and it felt stronger for it. The rhythms of the ranch settled into a new, 4-person harmony. Ethan, his hand now fully healed, leaving only a pale, star-shaped scar on his palm. worked his land with a renewed purpose. He was no longer just surviving, he was building. Chiton was a frequent visitor, sometimes staying for a week at a time. He and Ethan developed a silent, working respect. They mended fences together. They dug a new diversion channel from the creek, and they rode the perimeter. 2 sentinels guarding a small patch of peace. Camilla had turned the house into a home. The rooms were filled with the scent of her cooking, of drying herbs, and of the faint, clean smell of soap. But the biggest change, the one that still sometimes stopped Ethan in his tracks, was the sound. It was the sound of laughter. In the afternoons, the main room became a schoolhouse. Ethan, the quiet man who had once preferred the company of horses, would sit at the table, his head bent low. He had a pencil, and he was patiently guiding Chenoa's small hand as she formed the letters of her own name. She was a quick, serious student, her brow furrowed in concentration. Tianita, the little deer, was the reader. She would stand on a stool, the primer open, and in a high, clear voice, she would sound out the words, "The cow is in the barn." She would clap her hands at her own success, her early fears all but forgotten, replaced by a bright, bubbling confidence. The evenings were for stories. The fire, which had once been a weapon of terror, was now their hearth. They would sit around it, the girls in their nightgowns, their face rosy in the glow. Camilla would tell them the old stories of her people, of the coyote who tricked the stars, and of the butterfly, the spirit of change and grace. Ethan, in turn, found himself speaking of Missouri. He did not speak of the graves. He told them about the farm he had as a boy. He told a funny story about a stubborn mule named Ebenezer who would only walk backward on Tuesdays. Chenoa and Tianita would giggle, demanding to hear it again. He was building a new past for them, one made of laughter, not just of loss. With the new season, Camilla began her own project, behind the house, in the rich soil near the creek bed. She and Ethan fenced in a new garden. It was not for corn or beans. It was for her herbs. She had Chiton bring her cuttings and seeds from the high canyons. Soon, the small patch was a riot of strange, beautiful plants with silver leaves, purple flowers, and sharp, clean scents. Ethan, watching her work, had an idea. He took some of the leftover lumber from the barn raising and, on the north side of the house, where it was always shaded and cool, he built a small, clean room with a wide door. It had shelves, a solid table, and its own water pump. It became a place of healing. Jedediah, the rancher, was the first to use it. He had taken a bad wound from a length of barbed wire, and the cut was festering. He rode to the ranch, his hat in his hand, his arms swollen. Camilla, in her quiet, professional way, had taken him to the new room. She had cleaned the wound, not with whiskey, but with a poultice of boiled leaves that drew the heat. She had bound it in clean cloth. He had returned 3 days later, the swelling gone, the wound healing clean. He had left a sack of flour on the porch as payment. A few weeks later, an old Apache man, his wife ill, came down from the hills. He had heard the story of the woman at the Matthews Ranch. He found Ethan by the corral. Ethan had not stared. He had not reached for his rifle. He had offered the man water and brought him to Camilla. She had spoken with the man, her voice soft, and had given him a bundle of dried herbs and careful instructions. The ranch had become a bridge. It was a place where a cowboy and a warrior could pass each other on the porch and, seeing Ethan and Camilla, nod in a shared, awkward respect. The news from the capital came with Abigail Morse. She arrived in her buggy, not for a crisis, but for coffee. She sat on the porch, her papers in her lap. Hale's trial, she reported, had been a sensation. His threats of political connections had been nothing but the hot air of a bully against the cold, hard testimony of his own hired men, the ledger book, the coyote matches, and the sworn statements of a dozen Red Butte ranchers. His defense had collapsed in a single day. He was found guilty on all counts. His empire, built on fear and stolen land, crumbled The Double H was seized by the Territorial Bank and broken apart. The land was sold in small parcels. Jedediah and 3 other ranchers pooled their money and bought back the water rights to the main creek, the ones Hale had stolen from them years before. The balance of power in the valley had shifted, not to a new king, but back to the people. Wade Kincaid, because he had kidnapped a minor and crossed territorial lines, was tried by a federal marshal. He was sentenced to 30 years in a federal prison in a place so far east it was just a name on a map. He would never see Arizona again. And Red Butte, Abigail said with a small smile, was a different town. Sheriff Collier had found his spine. He had run 2 of Hale's old foremen out of town on vagrancy charges. He had patrolled the Apache trading posts, ensuring fair deals. The town's prejudice had not vanished overnight. Such deep sickness never does. But the open, casual hatred was gone, shamed into silence. People had seen the real monster, and he had been a rich white man in a fine suit, not a native in the hills. That night, the quiet of the ranch seemed deeper, more permanent. The air was warm, and the sky was a vast, brilliant spray of diamond dust. The stars of the high desert seemed so close you could touch them. Ethan and Camilla sat on the porch, side by side. In the 2 comfortable chairs Ethan had built, the girls were asleep. Their small, even breaths a sound of absolute peace. The crickets sang their loud, sawing song. For a long time, neither of them spoke. It was a silence that did not need to be filled. It was the sound of a life that was, finally, whole. He reached over and took her hand. His rough, calloused fingers interlaced with hers. He felt the smooth, cool silver of the butterfly ring he had made. "It is all done," he said, his voice low, almost a whisper. "He is gone. It is safe." "Yes," she said, "it is safe." He turned in his chair to face her. In the starlight, he could see the gentle curve of her cheek, the strength in her jaw, the deep, quiet wisdom in her eyes. "I was dead, Camilla," he said, the words coming from a place he had kept locked for 5 years. "When I came here, I was just a man waiting to stop breathing. I had forgotten what this felt like. You and Chenoa and Tyanita, you brought me back. You built this, not me." She turned her hand in his, her thumb tracing the scar on his palm, the brand of the fire that had brought them all together. "We built this, Ethan," she whispered. "You kicked down the wall. You built the beds. You brought the paper. We built it together." She leaned her head on his shoulder. He felt the warmth of her, the reality of her. His arm, his good left arm, went around her, pulling her close. It was not the desperate, rain-soaked clutch of 2 survivors. It was the easy, comfortable embrace of a husband and a wife. He tilted his head down. She looked up. He kissed her. It was a kiss as gentle as the starlight, a kiss of profound, settled peace. It was a promise made and a promise kept. It was the quiet, certain language of home. They sat there for a long time, not speaking, watching the stars wheel across the immense, silent sky. The lonely rancher was no longer lonely. The small house, once a fortress of solitude, was now a beacon of life, a tiny, warm point of light in the vast, sleeping desert. The reward for courage, Ethan knew, was not a medal. It was not praise. It was this. It was the feeling of his wife's head on his shoulder, the sound of his children breathing safely in their beds. It was the family he had not been born into, but the one he had chosen, and the one that had, in turn, chosen him. Many years would pass. The new barn would weather to a soft, silver gray. Chenoa and Tyanita would grow into strong, smart women, their minds a bridge between 2 worlds, their hearts rooted in this small patch of land. And they would tell their own children the story. They would tell them of the fire and the mysterious, quiet man who came from the smoke. They would tell them of their mother, who had faced down murderers and offered a life debt, but had found an equal. It would become the family legend, the story of how they began, a testament to the belief that justice and love were real. even in the hardest of lands. The ranch, as the years went on, became known as a place of refuge. The gate was never locked. Travelers, whether they were dusty cowboys riding the line or Apache families moving to the high country, knew that the house by the creek was a place for safe water, for a kind word, and, if you were hurt, for a healing hand. It was a place of peace, won from fire and hatred, and held together by love. Thank you for listening to this story. Please feel free to comment below on where you are listening from, so we can all connect and share our thoughts. And do not forget to subscribe to my channel Wild West Tales, like the video, and support us further by pressing the hype button so this story can be heard by more people.